The tabletop takeaway.
Game mechanics on display.
Three designers share the stage.
Pick a genre and we'll play.
The tabletop takeaway.
Welcome back to the Tabletop Takeaway. I'm Trevor Muller-Hagel.
I'm Ananda Gunratna.
And I'm Charlie McCarran.
And this time we'll be talking about asymmetric games for this series. We're going to start off today with Root. Everyone knows Leader Games' loved asymmetric game of woodland creatures going to battle in the forest or in different locations, depending on which map you're using. It's a fun little game where each different faction of woodland creatures or birds or whatever they happen to be have their own way of operating, completely unique to the other different factions. So for our game, we played with the Vagabonds, the Cats, which are the... What was their name again officially?
The Marquise de Cat.
Marquise de Cat. And then the Eerie for the birds.
Yep.
Yep, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
So each of these three ones that we played with specifically operated in a very different way, had its own unique setup. For instance, the Vagabond was running around, exploring ruins, doing all these things as one little creature, and could fight in combat still, but couldn't die necessarily, but could lose equipment, and the equipment could be damaged. So they're basically playing an RPG where everyone else is playing more of an RTS or not an RTS, but a strategic game
Area control
of creatures.
kind of thing.
Area control often.
Worker
I would say I
placement.
was playing an RTS.
Right, yeah. It feels very akin to an RTS, especially the cats. But yeah, I'd go over more specifics, but because each faction is so incredibly unique, it would be be lost in the details for a while. So I more kind of want to just open it up and just kind of talk about how the asymmetricness of this game really impacts the gameplay and how we all kind of run with different strategies that, are different from each other because we have different mechanics we're actually interacting with and how our different factions operate. Thoughts on your factions?
So I had played this a couple times in prototype phase, I guess, before it was published, because Leader Games is here in Minnesota. And I liked this play of it the most out of all of them. And maybe it's because of my faction. I really enjoyed the Airy, the birds.
Yep.
Have this power that they just have 4 actions possible that you can do on your turn, and you kind of commit to doing those actions every turn, so you can keep building up more actions, and you have to take those actions or you get punished, you go into turmoil. So it was just very fun. I've never played a game like it where your actions keep increasing, but you're forced to do those actions every time.
Yeah, you have a ramp up, and you have to keep that pace, or it fails.
I also really like that mechanic because I don't know. I guess it's hard to say risk. Well, no, there is some element of risk and reward, although you're forced to add to the decree every turn. So it's not like you're making a choice to add to it or not. I guess you can choose to add
one or two, which
right.
is really important to decide if you can do two.
That's true.
Continue that trend.
Okay, so there is an aspect of risk and reward, but I also like how it ties power progression to obligations, because often in games, when players are getting stronger in power, it's just making things easier for them because now they have more power.
Right.
But with the birds, with great power comes great responsibilities. The more you're able to do, the more you have to do. And so at the same time that you're just getting a crazy number of actions, you're also like, oh no, how am I going to make this work? I am going to collapse.
Yeah.
This is awful.
Yeah, because these kind of actions are things like, I have to battle every turn. And if
you have to battle at certain locations, which also can make it really constraining.
Yeah.
Which is really fun seeing your counterplay to me of if we remove Charlie from this spot, he can't do the move action away from there because he's not there anymore.
Or if we don't go into the places where you have to battle, then you can't battle there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that mechanic. I wish I saw it in more games. Actually, I took some inspiration from that for one of my own games, Kluge, which is a game about robots with programs that grow longer and longer, and then you
Sure.
have to execute. It's, I mean, in a way, the bird thing's also programming.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
little
true.
looser.
Yeah, and I even thematically that they're decrees and that it's this like royalty and like very
Yeah.
structured society that has to do this. It's like, oh man, what if you're not set up to do it anymore? So as you're planning on your turn, you're trying to make sure that you're set up right. But then the Marquise of Cats comes in and just completely obliterates one of the armies or destroys one of the nests that you need to actually recruit on. And it's like, oh man, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think honestly, Charlie,
yeah.
you did a really good job because you only had a turmoil once,
Yeah.
so you kept
But
it
there's
going for a
probably
while.
games that people don't get turmoil. I
What-
don't know.
I think when I play the birds, I usually try to go into turmoil as soon as possible by just building lots and lots of roosts, and then I can't build anymore. I think
Being able to command that turmoil.
I don't think
your
turmoil is
benefit.
something you need to be afraid of necessarily,
Sure.
especially if you have all your roosts out. What you want to be afraid of is turmoil when you don't have many roosts out, because then you're not set up well for the next dynasty. The Erie
It is
dynasties.
funny.
That's
Eerie Dynasties.
Okay.
There we go.
It is funny how naming an action is really important to like they could have called it anything, but because they called it turmoil. Players are like, no, that's probably not a good thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
Well, I have to discard all of my action cards that I've spent the last multiple turns building up.
Yep, which
Yeah.
is bad.
Yeah, when having to re-ramp is always hard, and also like when you do get later into the game, having to restart from scratch can be a really big setback.
But you get to choose a new
Right.
leader, I guess,
With
so,
new
or-
benefits, and you can rebuild your tableau, which is great because now you've learned from the past one what you need to do, but you may be in a rough position now. So
Yeah.
being able to be in as much command of that as possible is great.
Yes. Yeah. So, the birds are super cool. Would definitely like to see more games with decree-like mechanics. The cats, by contrast, they're also a faction that does a lot of fighting. There's lots of birds, there's lots of cats. With the cats, the big challenge is actions, because you have a very limited number of actions every turn. Cats get to do 3 actions, plus they can craft. I don't think we haven't talked about crafting.
We haven't,
but
no.
That's definitely something. In Root, there are these cards. You have cards. Each card has a suit, and it has an effect when it's crafted. Aside from ambushes, which don't need to be crafted, but so a big part of the game is, well, depending on your faction, a big part of the game may be. You have these cards in your hand. Well, okay, which ones can I craft, and are they beneficial to me? And when I'm playing the cats, at least with the original deck of cards, one of my considerations is that bunny crafting symbols. So there's 3 suits in Root: bunnies, foxes, and mice. And each one corresponds to a certain clearing. And when you craft, you need crafting resources, crafting suits in that clearing. It's like you want to craft a card that needs bunny suits, you need to have crafting buildings in a bunny clearing. And as the cats, I often like to build my workshops in bunny clearings, because the bunny cards, at least in the starter deck, often give you extra actions, which is good because the cats are so tight on actions. Another cool thing about the cats is they have these field medics. So whenever you have your cats die in battle, you can spend a card matching their clearing to revive them, which means having a lot of cards is pretty helpful because it means that you don't lose your warriors. And then the central challenge of the cats is just you need to build buildings in clearings, and that means you produce wood. You need to have a clear path, a clear supply line to transport the wood to the clearing that you want, and then there needs to be an open space to build the building there. And that's how you get most of your points, that and crafting. And so this is why it's kind of sort of like an RTS, gather
Right.
the resources, build stuff, defend the stuff you've built.
It feels very Warcraft similar, or any of those older RTS games where you have your resource generators, you have this building does this function.
Right.
versus like the Eyrie, which only have roosts where they are
Yeah.
making more of themselves, but all of their actions are coming from their tableau.
Yeah, so the cats are a lot more familiar than the Eyrie to players, I think, which I think is good because, you know, you have a game like this where the factions are very different. If you have a new player, I think often people say, well, have them play the cats.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would say the cats are the easiest to win as, but
right.
it is pretty easy to understand how they work.
The most familiar and most accessible.
Yeah, so I think it's good that they have a faction like that that's pretty intuitive
Yeah.
as to what it is you want to do.
Well, and I would also counter the Vagabond as a great one to start with as well, because you're not worried about so many different moving pieces. You have your character, and your character's moving around, and you can pay attention to the larger scale battles that are happening, and you can, you know, forge alliances and, you know, create and trade items, which actually impact your character versus the other groups that don't really have a big impact with what items they create, other than like a limited supply. So being able to kind of be introduced to how everyone else handles their factions is a great way to like just learn the game, especially with an asymmetrical field.
That's a good point. Actually, another thing about the Vagabond that I think is also really good for new players is that unlike the other factions, there is pretty much no incentive to attack the Vagabond.
Yeah.
Because you don't get anything from it. With most factions, if you destroy their buildings, you get points.
Yeah.
Vagabond doesn't have any buildings. You can beat the Vagabond up and it hurts them, but it doesn't help you.
Right. You're just being mean.
And I sometimes was tempted as the Eyrie because
You almost
I had to battle.
had to. Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I still wanted to kill the cats because the
Yeah, Ananda
buildings
was
would-
definitely on the course to
Yeah.
win. And so I was actually friends with Ananda. I was allied with him, but I was actually leading his cats astray.
I mean, I think of it as you're not friends with me. You're
Yeah.
friends with my warriors.
Yeah, exactly.
And I cannot have that.
Your population.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's
Yeah.
it's a great game like that because you have so many different perspectives of how to play it. At first, when I first played Root, when I think it, like, you know, within the first couple of years it came out, I was like, oh my God, this is so interesting. But also, I feel like I'd have to play it so many times to master it. And I don't know that I can commit that to the game. And then just playing it recently, it's like, okay, now a lot of this is a lot more familiar now. And maybe like Root specifically inspired other games to come out that, you know, ran with some of these asymmetrical components. And I think it really gives a good space, a good design space to really play with things and really like kind of grow the different ways you can interact with the same space.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I think that's a great thing to have.
I mean, yeah, Root accomplished something that I definitely wanted to do for a while. Back in college, I was really into Dune.
Oh yeah.
Which is also a highly asymmetric game. But Dune takes a really long time. So one of my game design things back then was I was thinking, okay, you know, how can I make a game that's super asymmetric, but maybe is a bit shorter than Dune? And I had various ideas, but none of them really went anywhere. But Root is exactly, I think, what I was looking for.
Yeah, and you know, it creates this just kind of open space. The map is very simple. You have kind of adjacency with the different clearings you can go into, and then you also have forests. The Vagabond, for instance, can actually move freely once at the beginning of their turn. And so like they have a little bit more flexibility with moving into forests versus clearings, which is just, it kind of opens it up so they can't be followed into the forest because none of the other factions that we played with, at least, can use the forest for movement. And so I could actually go in there, hide out, heal if I got hurt. And I even get bonuses for repairing my equipment, which is kind of my health in a way. And so like, yeah, it's a beautiful, big open space to play in with all these different rules happening all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me also seeing Vast, which was the first Leader Games game that was even more asymmetric. And then that game, one of the big drawbacks is teaching it, which is like Root still takes a while to teach because you have to teach kind of 4 different games.
Right.
And in Vast, there are even more different roles. Like one person is building out the map as the cave, and one person's the dragon, one person's the knight, and so on, and the goblins. And what's cool seeing how they refined that for Root is a couple things that I noticed that I really think are great. And maybe this is my takeaway from Root is the single deck of cards that everyone interacts with.
Yeah.
As well as a single score track that everyone interacts with. And that was like one of the hardest things in Vast is like, I don't know if I'm winning or not. And it's very clear in Root, like, oh, yeah.
Finding the points of
Right.
symmetry in an asymmetric game.
Yeah, because in Vast, everyone has a completely different way to win. But in Root, it's all get to 30 points. And I think there are other places where Root has points of commonality. I think that's really important. Having things in common, even when your factions are very different, so that players can understand what other people are trying to do, because it's similar to what they're trying to do, but a little bit different. Like in Root, there's a lot of shared mechanics, right? Like combat works pretty much the same way for everyone. Combat, incidentally, in Root, I really like. Let me just go on a brief tangent about this. So the Root combat system is you roll 2 dice. They're D12s, but they're really D4s. They're just D4s that are fun to roll because they're not.
They're D4s that
triangles,
actually
they're
roll?
pyramids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're numbered 0 to 3. You roll 2 of them. The attacker takes the higher one. The defender takes the lower one. And that's how many of your opponent's units you kill.
Yeah.
And what's kind of nice about this is, first of all, there's no defense dice.
Right.
I do not like defense dice. When I say defense dice, I mean for example, in HeroScape, one player rolls attack dice, one player rolls defense dice. You compare how many skulls against how many shields. I don't like, in general, when games have you do work just to maintain the status quo. So what I mean by that is, like, if when you ask players to roll dice, you're asking them to do some work, right? And if the reward for that is just, okay, things stay the same, that's not exciting.
Right. Because even if you tie in Root, you still remove that many of the other person's army.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Even if you tie, something still happens.
Yeah.
And the attacker's rolling both dice. Obviously, it's to the advantage of the attacker. They're the one with all the stakes, so they're the one doing all the work. The defender just sort of sits back and watches what happens, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
If you're getting the benefit, you should be doing the work. It keeps things moving forward. I think it's really good, and it's really simple. Just roll 2 dice, look at them, and then you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. Fast resolution. And you obviously still have, ambushes, like you mentioned earlier, allow you to have kind of a jump on the opposing army.
Right, an interrupt.
An interrupt, yeah.
I think last series we talked a little bit about interrupts.
Yeah, I think, yes, we did.
The unique advantage of board games.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I just thinking about the asymmetry side of it. I really like that there's very clear visual asymmetric start of the game too. It's like the cats are all over the place.
Oh yeah.
The birds start off in one corner, and they're going to be trying to spread out and eat. I was like, I could already kind of imagine the story in my head of like, well, by the end, the birds will have dominated at least half of the map, maybe, against the cats. So it's like this, and then Trevor's over here just wondering.
Hey guys,
But
Yeah.
I found this sword.
and the fourth in the base game, Woodland Alliance. Remind me how they start out on the board. Are they in spaces or?
So the Woodland Alliance has sympathy tokens, which sort of represent popular sympathy towards their rebellion against their tyrannical overlords. So they start
the
off.
cats?
Yes, the
Essentially?
cats.
Okay.
The cats are the tyrannical overlords. So
We all know that.
The Woodland Alliance, I think, actually, I don't think they start with anything on the board. I think on their first turn they can add a sympathy marker wherever they want. So they don't actually get any warriors out on the board until a revolt happens.
Oh man.
So yeah, they're also they're also quite different. Yeah, and I don't think I can think. Well, I don't think I can think of many other games where there's such a stark difference
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Where one player doesn't start on the board at all. Like that's
Yeah.
kind of,
Versus the cats versus the birds.
Well, the cats are just covering the board. There's
Cats are
cats
all over everywhere.
literally
Yeah.
everywhere.
Birds in one little hole. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, it's really interesting having everything be so asymmetric. And I think this is probably to me, this feels like the most asymmetric of all the games we played for this series. Because you have asymmetric starting and asymmetric actions or even your turn order and the different way things happen is all completely unique to your character. And some asymmetric games, you'll just have like a simple point of asymmetry where, you react to something differently than something else. I don't want to give too much away of what we're going to talk about, but yeah, it's really interesting being able to create an entirely different turn order and starting condition and all this stuff and just like interactions with everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And still have it feel, I don't want to say balanced. Balance isn't the right word, but that you all have the tools you need to do what you're trying to do.
yeah. And I think the like commonalities thing we were talking about is pretty important in terms of like I was just imagining them designing and developing this game. They were probably like, okay, here's all the way. We would probably do like a map like we've done Ananda, where you have this method of, okay, what are the possible actions and interactions that can happen? And like do kind of a mind map and like, how can we connect this one to this one to this one? And probably a lot of them are related to cards. So like,
Oh, sure.
the vagabond is
Trading cards
trading
for
cards around
allyship.
and, which this card means something totally different to me, but it's still a resource. And I don't
That actually kind of brings me to my takeaway,
nice.
which is so it is I think the card system is really cool because, like you say, the cards do feel different depending on your faction. For example, as the cats, I crafted a card called the Better Burrow Bank, which is during Birdsong, and actually this is another slight side note, but there's 3 phases, Birdsong, Daylight, and evening, I think.
Nightfall.
Each player has their turn divided into these 3 phases, but what happens in each phase is completely different.
Right.
Which means a card that says do this during this phase might be wildly different for one faction versus another.
Yeah.
Depending on what else they get to do during that phase. But so like Better Burrow Bank, in Birdsong, you and another player draw a card. So this is great for the cats because the cats love cards, right? Cats can use cards, any cards, because you can use cards to rescue your cats from death, and you can craft them. And the cats are pretty good at crafting.
They're crafty cats.
Yeah, and bird cards are the best. Cats love bird cards. Bird cards are cards with a wild suit, so they can count as any of the 3 suits when you use them for your faction abilities. And cats can use bird cards to take extra actions, which they are...
Given their limited action supply.
Yes.
That's huge.
Yeah, so cats love cards. But if I were, say, the Vagabond, I don't think Better Burrow Bank would be anywhere near as useful because Vagabond doesn't really need cards. I mean,
You like cards for making allies.
yeah, but you don't need them in the same way that the cats do.
Oh, no. I held off a long time until I used my first card to craft my first item.
Right, or like the birds. I mean, birds cards are useful for the decree, but crafting isn't as good for the birds because they get fewer points for crafting items. Mm-hmm. And then there's like factions from expansions like the lizards. Pro tip: lizards love cards. If you're a lizard, do absolutely anything to get cards. It doesn't matter what. Cards are how you win. But yeah, so different factions have sort of different feelings towards the same card.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. Because like you can play the cats and say, oh, the Better Burrow Bank, awesome. And then you can play a different faction and you can sort of, okay, I liked this card when I was a cats and now not so much. But it's the same thing. It's a commonality.
That's cool.
And because with that card specifically, you give another card to another player.
Right.
And so like you almost have an alliance happening where you have this opportunity like, hey, I really like, or I don't care what is going to happen with this player, so I'm going to give them resources because I think the other player is more dangerous to me.
Yeah, that's actually Root also does a really good job of having mechanics where players help each other, which sort of provides a implicit catch-up mechanism for whoever's in last place, because obviously you're going to help.
Oh,
them,
yeah.
right.
Yeah, help the person in last place because you have no worry about them winning until they have enough resources to come back.
But I think my takeaway is that if you're doing an asymmetric game, have resources that everybody has access to, but that have very different meanings depending on which faction you're playing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna. I was gonna use a similar thing for my takeaway, so I'll use a different one. But the way I was gonna go about it is that make sure you like specifically define the points of commonality or the symmetrical points, because that's gonna be how the players interact with each other in the game, and that will be where the most tension comes from, right? So if two different factions are fighting over the same territory, then that is a point of commonality that they are vying for. But as long as everything else is asymmetric and how they go about it and all that, then it feels really unique and really different with how the other team is going. So for mine, I really, really enjoyed how, as the vagabond, I'm running around, literally uncovering things from ruins, and I'm exploring and I'm doing all these things. Being able to design completely asymmetrical experiences for the players is, I think, a really great thing if you're able to lean into that. Obviously, you can have asymmetricality in a lot of different ways, but if you're trying to do something like Root, think about the different player types and try to design factions for those player types. Because I love RPGs, I'm a big RPG person, and the Vagabond was perfect for that. And honestly, the rules were very simple, and I found ways to improve my character. It's if I get this item, I get more card draws, or if I get this item, I can repair more of my equipment. It's this is a fun little thing to do. Oh, they're killing each other. Oh God. Okay, well,
Yeah.
and I could go help them if I wanted, but I don't really want to have to repair my equipment. And so versus where Charlie was, it's okay, well, I have to go kill someone right now, or I have to go fight someone, so I'm going to go to this location and just fight these cats.
That's a very good point, because I really do like programming games, and I didn't think about it, but I was essentially playing a programming game.
Yeah, so if you maybe do just more of the RTS, then you really like playing the cats, but maybe the birds are just a really just awful thing, because you want to have more control over each individual action, and you don't want to have to do that much pre-planning.
I wonder if Root has anything about that in the rulebook, about hey, do you like this kind of game?
Yeah.
Maybe you should try this first.
I mean, it would be really cool. And I mean, there's probably posts about it.
I think, I'm not sure if Root does that, but Sidereal Confluence, I think, has very clear advice in its different factions over what type of player is likely to enjoy each faction.
Yeah,
That's...
being able to have that guidance, because I do love having a single player perspective with abilities and skills and being able to leverage those things for my character. And I play a lot of other games too, but that's kind of my go-to. And I didn't think about Vagabond being that much in sync with what I enjoyed about games. But being able to sway over Ananda's soldiers to my side and lead him away from the places he was trying to control, I'm this is great. I love this. Yeah. So it completely changed my opinion, because I played Eerie the last time I played Root. And it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed the thought mechanic, or the thoughts behind it, behind the mechanics. And I'm well, but I don't. It's fun and interesting, but it's not really for me at the moment. But then realizing the Vagabond is perfect, I'm oh, okay,
Yeah.
So being able to design with other perspectives in mind, I think is a huge thing with asymmetric games.
Yeah, I'll bring it up more in our final episode about asymmetric games, probably, but the game at the top of my mind that I'm working on is Glasses game.
Oh yeah,
where
Glasses game.
Robots are seeing the world in ones and zeros through their red glasses and numbers, and the humans are seeing words, and it's I'm now thinking about more okay, if someone sits down at the table and you're I might say to them do you want to think more like a human or like a computer? And the computer, I'm leaning more even into it being just a abstract puzzle kind of thing that they're solving, number based, whereas the humans are going around doing surviving tasks and like rolling dice and trying to,
Oh, interesting.
yeah. So whereas the computer is calculating the probabilities, and then they get to do the rerolls of the human's actions.
Oh.
So yeah, but yeah, I think giving players the option when they sit down of like 2 really distinct games or more.
Yeah.
It was pretty fun. Hence our next game. Oh man, I can't wait to talk about in our next episode. I think, but any final thoughts about Root?
It's a good game.
I like it. Sorry.
It's all right. Didn't win any awards or anything, but
I didn't.
no,
I didn't win any awards when I played it, so you know. I got close to actually jumping way ahead at one point.
Yeah.
With all my gifts when I gave Ananda so many gifts. He didn't like that.
Just kidding. Root is great and won a lot of awards.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
Our friends at Leader Games, congrats.
Well deserved.
Yeah. Cool. With that, let's close it out and join us next time for Android Netrunner.
Hey, thanks for listening to The Tabletop Takeaway. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. So please tell your friends and visit our website at thetabletoptakeaway.com, where you can suggest games and mechanics for us to cover next on the show.